Rishut Rosh Yeshiva, Rishut Rabbi, Rishut the other Rabbanim here, Rishut Chen, feels somewhat inappropriate for me to try put some thoughts together, put some words together in honor of Rabbi Lichtenstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. And I think I'm coming from a bit of a different perspective. I think the Rosh Yeshiva's got a very deep perspective, a perspective of leadership, a perspective of time, a perspective of family, a perspective of understanding Gadlut in the world, which I certainly don't have. Rabbi Bernstein will address you afterwards. He spent many years in Yeshivat Har Zion and in Rabbi Lichtenstein's shiur. I was just a stunt Talmud in Gush. I was just a simple Talmud in my first 2 years. I didn't have the split that you have to learn Gemara for many years before I got to Yeshiva. But I got to Yeshiva and I sat in Gush. I barely knew what sort of situation I was putting myself into. And it took me a couple of weeks to even realize what was going on at all when I stepped into Yeshiva. I remember one night struggling to even find my room. My head was spinning so crazy. And soon I realized the empire that I was in, Yeshivat Har Zion. It was an absolute empire, an unbelievable organization, incredible institution, and a place where I owe so much and such a debt of gratitude to Rabbi Aharon, to Rabbi Amital, to the institution, to all the Rabbanim over there for what I gained in my early years of learning. And I think I come from a different perspective, not from the perspective of having been in Rabbi Aharon's shiur for very long. I did try many times to try to understand Rabbi Aharon, but as the Rosh Yeshiva said, his English was absolutely incredible. We thought maybe his Hebrew was difficult to understand. His English was also almost a different language in terms of the expansiveness, the depth. As soon as we arrived in Gush, as many MTA boys will tell you, they give you you get a list. It's called a Gush word list. There's the milon that you have to learn in terms of Hebrew and Aramaic and that to be able to understand the Gemara. But then there's a Hebrew word list that you have to learn in order to be able just to understand Rabbi Aharon Lichtenstein. Because the sophistication of who he was, the eloquence of the way he was able to express his ideas and the ideas of the Torah and Rishonim and Poskim and the whole world of Torah was something that was unimaginable. And there I was zocher to have a makom that was quite close to where Rabbi Aharon sat, and Rabbi Daniel sat in that makom afterwards for a little bit, and I used to sit there and watch all the guys go up to speak to Rabbi Aharon, to the Rosh Yeshiva, and there would be a sense of trepidation. There would be a shuffling of people. Everybody would try to see when is the time that they can go ask their shaila. First they'd spend months trying to think of what's the shaila they want to ask, what's the question they want to ask, what's the way that they can, on the one hand, get Rabbi Aharon's incredible insight into the problem that they're having, but on the other hand, how can they come up with a problem that they'd be able to go and present to Rabbi Aharon to be able to have that very rare and special interaction with him. And I remember struggling with a certain question and seeing all the guys coming up, and they'd wait for the gap. As somebody would leave, somebody else would go stand there. Rabbi Aharon would be absolutely immersed in his learning, absolutely at one with the Sfarim he was learning. You could see him connecting to the Rishonim, to the Amoraim, to the Tanaim, to the Ribono Shel Olam, in that moment that he would be standing there, sitting there in his makom learning. And he would look up every now and then and he would see somebody there, and with his big inviting eyes, he'd invite you to come sit down, and he'd sit down. So I watched for many weeks, a couple of months, trying to build up the courage to go sit down with Rabbi Aharon. Eventually I did, and my heart pounding and pounding and pounding. I could hear my heart in my ears, and I went and I sat down next to Rabbi Aharon. I told Rav Zevi the story yesterday, and I had an incredible experience. I sat down there, and I realized I wasn't just sitting with any simple man. I wasn't just sitting with a man who's just of this world. And the first thing I realized was it was the first time in my life I feel like anybody had ever listened to me. I sat down, and Rabbi Aharon, having the incredible capacity that he had, you sit down and he said, "What's your question?" And I started asking my question. Normally when you're in a conversation with somebody, all the time they're trying to butt in, they're trying to tell you certain things and say, question this and interrogate that and show you how much they know, and tell you what question you're really asking, because they've got a set conventional system of questions and answers that they can give you ready to go. But that wasn't Rabbi Aharon. He listened to absolutely every single word and wanted to try understand what was the source of every single thing you were saying. Where was it coming from? From what depth within you were you asking such a question? And I asked him the following question. said to him, how do you know? I'm in yeshiva, Baruch Hashem, I've been learning how to learn and develop. But how do I know that when I solve a sugya, or when I've spent time on the Rishonim, and I finally understand it, and I feel a real geschmack? I said, how do I know that it's not just like a great mathematician who solves a difficult sum, and he understands the answer, and then he gets a geschmack, he also gets a feeling of a sense of achievement. And as I said, every word, I had to start measuring every word I said, because it was the first time that I'd ever experienced somebody listening to every little word I was saying. And he listened to the question, he put his head down for a moment, he then lifted up his head again, and started to answer an answer that I think if for 4 months I sat down and I tried to write it, I would never come close to the eloquence, to the beauty, and the depth of what he answered me. And not only was the answer profound, but obviously the experience. And he spoke to me about understanding the experience of Torah as being something that has to be qualified by saying Birkot Torah, of the sweetness of Torah, of saying Arevna, of opening yourself up to saying this is the word of Hashem. That yes, learning Torah can sometimes just become an intellectual pursuit and nothing more than a math sum, if that's how you forget to qualify it. But if you qualify it, if you understand the experience that you're in, and if you sit down with the Gemara open and you say this is going to be a time of connection with me through Ribono Shel Olam, then that itself opens up the channel. And he looked at me with a big smile and he said to me, and it also takes time, be patient. The more you learn and the more you get beyond, similar to, I guess, riding a bicycle. The first time you're trying to ride, all you're thinking about is the pedals, all you're thinking about is holding on, all you're thinking about is not tipping over. But once you start to build a proficiency, once you start to understand it, then that becomes subconscious and you can start really enjoying the experience for what it is and connecting to the true essence of it. And in a way, that's what I learned in that experience. It was that patience to internalize, to integrate, to have the patience to see the long-term goal. And Baruch Hashem, after many years of learning, I started to get that experience and to connect to Torah learning in that way. And it all went back to that time. And I remember another experience where Rabbi Aharon, in that moment, he slapped his hand on my leg and he said, "Just have patience, you'll get there." And that was also something like I told people, Rabbi Aharon even reached out to me, and it was something that people were, that was like a special experience. And I don't want to go on for too long, but I think something that was very indicative for me later on in life was I had another shaila, and a big shaila what to do. It's in Rabbi Tanz's book, in the biography, that I had a shaila what to do in terms of where to go in my life, what career to follow, and it was a very difficult question. And once again, I sat for weeks and weeks and weeks. I even bought a whiteboard to put up in my dining room, and the dining room and the kitchen, the lounge is the same when you're learning in college. And I put up the whiteboard up, and I was trying to think of all different ways to make up this decision, and I was really torn. I did all these different ways of a weighted factor chart to try and make the decision, and everywhere I went, I was completely torn and completely split. And I decided I was going to go speak to Rabbi Aharon, and I was learning with Rabbi Daniel at the time. We were learning Hilchot Nida, and I said to Rabbi Daniel, without too much thinking, I said, maybe I'm just going to ask Rabbi Aharon. And I plucked up the courage, and I went to go sit there. And before that, I said to myself something. I said, now I'm grown up. I've gone through some experiences in life, some things more difficult, I'm a little bit more mature. Am I really going to feel that same thing like when I was a younger child, when I was just starting out, that feeling of sitting with somebody that you feel like they're from another world? You feel like you actually experience the Shekhinah when you're sitting down next to them. Am I going to be able to experience that? And I took my expectations down very low, and I said, let me just go speak to this man. He's an incredible, incredible man, incredible leader, and see what he has to say. And I once again sat down with Rabbi Aharon. I waited a little bit less than I had in the previous time. And I went and I sat down and I introduced myself. I mentioned Rabbi Tanza. Rabbi Lichtenstein told me about the connection he had with the family. And I was blown away. Because not only was I not disappointed by not feeling that same sense of the Shekhinah, that same sense of greatness in a man from another world, but it was much, much, much more profound. I was more mature. I was more refined. I'd grown up. But that experience was even more profound. And it was incredible to be around a man that exuded such kedusha, such sanctity, such holiness. And thinking about, what's the trait that underlies it all, I think I found something from one of my Rabbi who learned, he got a smicha when we were there, when I was there in Shana Aleph and Shana Bet, Rabbi Bernstein, and he posted the following on Facebook last night, and I just want to read it to you. He said, during this initial moment, after hearing the sad news below, it is almost impossible for me to try and collect my thoughts coherently, let alone organize them in writing. on the passing of my revered and beloved Rabbi of Aharon Lichtenstein. But one Talmudic statement about Hashem Almighty has kept popping into my head for the last 2 hours. And he reads it from Megillah Lamed Aleph. Chol makom she'atam motzei gedulato shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sham atam motzei anvatnuton. Every place where you find the greatness of Hashem, that is where you also find Hashem's gentleness or His humbleness. Rabbi, you attain greatness in everything you touched, as the word shortcut was not part of your vocabulary. You had the highest standards from yourself and in turn your thousands of morning students, in ways that will yet be spoken of, and yet gaining undisputed greatness in Torah, general studies, mortality, ethics, honesty, tzadikut, and so much more. A complete avodat Hashem with every fibre of your being. And recognized globally with many awards for this lifelong toil, you constantly follow the dictum of what does Hashem ask for you, that you should walk in the ways of Hashem. And with all the greatness above you, the most humble and gentle individual I've ever been privileged to meet. Never assuming that any of the above is out of the ordinary, but rather naturally part of the mission of every Jew on earth. With you just being one of many that should live up to what Hashem explicitly asks in the Torah, and now all Israel, what does the Lord your God demand of you? Only to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all His ways and to love Him, and to worship the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. And I think that was it. Somebody with such greatness and with such anava at the same time is a true place for the manifestation of the Shekhinah in the world. And it was an unbelievable privilege to have sat in the Beit Midrash. Not that I was in the Shia of Rabbi Aharon, not that I was off there, but I think from a different perspective I was able to learn so much more. And I want to just share one last idea that I think is so pertinent to us as a community, as a school. And that is Rabbi Aharon really blazed an incredible path very eloquently and beautifully for what modern orthodoxy is, for what religious Zionism is. And I think there's such a misnomer, and if you want to listen to one thing I've said, then I think it's this. It's such a misunderstanding of what modern orthodoxy in the world, or modern orthodoxy is in the world. What does it mean? We think it's modern orthodoxy, right? On the one side you have religion, on the other side you have the world of modernity. Well, then you become religious, and I don't have to take the whole step towards religion. So I'll just take a little step. I'll keep my one foot in the modern world. I'll keep my one foot in the orthodox world. I'll be religious. I'll also be modern, and it'll all, work out okay. And at least I don't have to take such a big dive into the mikveh of religiosity, or becoming frum, or becoming close to Hashem. And it's the biggest misconception that there is. And sometimes people become attracted to that ideology because of that misconception. They think, we only have to go halfway. But Rabbi Aharon was a living example of what true modern orthodoxy is. And to delve in the most deep and essential and core-filled way into the depth of the Torah. To go right down into the deepest depths of the Torah. To be completely rooted in Torah. To see the whole world only through the prism of Torah. And as an outgrowth of that, understand that for the Torah to be manifest in the world, I need to be involved in the world. I need to be updated and be a part of modernity, and I need to shape modernity through the prism of the Torah. So in essence, it's not easier to be modern orthodox. The true calling of modern orthodoxy is much harder, is much more difficult. It's much a greater challenge because you're trying to achieve more. You're trying to live completely rooted and with an in-depth connection with the Torah world, and through that, as an outgrowth of that, you then reach out to the modern world and color it with the vision of Torah. And I think Rabbi Aharon was a living example of that through his works, like different books like Baha'is Light, which I would recommend everybody try to get a hold of, and when you're old enough to try and understand it. But through those different things, that vision was so clear and so important for the world that we live in a world where we can't escape modernity. And we're not going to compromise by being part of it because we have to, but rather know how to, through the Torah, be involved in it and to shape it in the most incredible way possible. And I think that's the legacy of Rabbi Aharon in one element. It's the legacy of us, and it's the legacy of what we have to do in terms of being a change in the world, in uplifting the world, and please God, shaping the world for better in everything that we do. He's the Rabbi Aharon.